Hi everyone, and welcome back to the test kitchen above Frontera Grill, where we're cooking live. We're having these very casual hangouts in the kitchen, and I'm cooking totally live, which means I'm cooking without a safety net, which means you get to see all the mistakes and all that sort of stuff. If you've joined us earlier this week, you know that there have been a few of those things, but hey, that's what befalls all of us when we're in the kitchen. I'm going to do, in a very short amount of time, 3 recipes for you, and they all go together. The real star of this is what we call Chipotle Shrimp. And it's one of those hack recipes. You can always have the ingredients on hand to make it, so that if people do come over for a nice dinner, you can do Chipotle shrimp with them. Now I'm going to use frozen shrimp, so that's why it becomes sort of a pantry staple recipe for me. And I always like to pair it with Mexican style white rice. I am putting some oil here in this is about an 8-inch 2-quart saucepan, and I'm going to add to that. I've had it warming up for a little bit, so I'm going to start to cook some onion in that. And while the onion is cooking, I'm going to mash 2 cloves of garlic, take the peel off of them like usual. I'm going to mash that one up to really release that papery skin, and then do a chop on that. Actually, I'm going to get it closer to a mince, so I'm going to use the technique that I've showed you a couple of times already this week. I'm going to cut crosswise, get all those little papery bits off of my knife, cut crosswise like this to slice it first, and then I'm going to chop back and forth, rocking and chopping, holding the knife with my left hand, and then rocking and chopping with my right, and then that mincing goes super fast like that. Okay, let's look at our onion over here. So I don't want this to brown hardly at all. I don't mind if there's a couple of little browned bits in there, because this is going to be white rice done in the traditional Gulf style. That means it's done on the Gulf side of Mexico. I always think of this as the classic rice from Veracruz, and it goes so beautifully with all the flavors of Veracruz, which is what this shrimp dish really is. So we've got a little of the, oops, I got to do one more thing here. I got to put the rice in here. Okay, so this, when you're making a classic Mexican rice, you're making a style of rice pilaf. This is a technique that was brought to Mexico by the Spaniards. The rice was brought to Mexico by the Spaniards as well. And the Spaniards got this from the Moors that brought it over from the Middle East. Probably it originated in India. We always think about rice pilaf as being an Indian kind of dish. But the thing that sets it apart is the fact that we are sauteing the raw rice first. And what you'll notice, come in here and look at this, is that some of these kernels have started to color to an opaque white. Okay, they've turned from translucent to opaque white. And that is what we're looking for. That cooks the starch on the outside of the rice, so that when you finish cooking this, it won't be sticky rice at all. Now I'm using here a medium grain rice. That's what my favorite rice in Mexico, the one that comes from Morelos, that's what it is. It's a medium grain rice. It's not a long grain rice. So that's what we use in our restaurant. I love the texture of it. It's a little meatier than a long grain rice, which tends to be very fluffy and almost dry in its texture. So I like medium grain rice because it gives me a little bit more texture, and I enjoy that. That's all we have to do, is to see most of those kernels turn from that translucent to that milky. And then I'm going to add the garlic to it, and I'm going to stir that up. And once I smell it, remember, with garlic cooking, when you're adding it to a hot pan, it's all about the nose. So you could say, yeah, maybe 45 seconds or so, but just rely on your nose to always be the thing that is telling you if the if the garlic is cooked or not. Okay, so now I'm smelling that garlic, which means that it's going to be nicely cooked in there. I'm going to add to it, and these are measured amounts. I started with 1.5 cups of the medium grain rice, and I'm adding to that 2.5 cups of chicken broth. I'm going to stir that up, making sure that there is no rice kernel visible stuck on the side of the pan here. And once this comes to a boil, so I'll put it on high to bring it to a boil, then I'm going to turn it down to low, and I'm going to put the top on it, and we're going to just let it cook over the lowest fire for about 15 minutes or so. Then we'll turn it off, and by that point we should be finished with our beautiful shrimp al chipotle and a nice salad with a creamy dressing. So you can blast out this wonderful, wonderful meal in very, very little time. So I'm waiting for this to come back to its boil here. It's just starting to look like it's going to do that on the side here, but it's not quite there yet. I always let it come to that full boil so that I know that the heat has penetrated all the way to the center of the pot before I put the cover on it, and that way I know that my rice will be cooked evenly all the way through this cooking process. Okay, so just the equivalent of a small onion. I had a large onion here, so I only used 1/2 of that, a couple cloves of garlic. So we'll get rid of those guys over there. And now we'll talk about this shrimp dish. So it goes together really fast, but we got to get all of the ingredients set up beforehand. Then I'll take you over and talk about making a salad with a creamy dressing, Queso Anejo dressing. But let's just talk about what these ingredients are going to be for this. Of course, there is chipotle that goes into this, and the can of chipotles now come with these very easy to remove tops on them. So we'll put that over there. Usually when you buy the chipotles, it'll say something like in adobo. That's a salsa adobo, and that's adobo sauce over here. What that means is that this is a chipotle, which is a dried chili that has been rehydrated in a sort of vinegary tomato sauce. Here it's called an adobo. The vinegary tomato sauce means that you can work with chipotles super easy, and these will last for a month or more in your refrigerator. I take them out of the can, put them into a small jar, put the top on very tightly, and then put them away. It's a preserved product. There's lots of salt and lots of vinegar in this particular thing. If you pull out one of the chilies, which I will do right now for you, you will see that it sort of is the size of a jalapeno. That one doesn't look very illustrative, let's call it that. So this one is much more illustrative, but you'll see it's about the size of a jalapeno. It is a smoke-dried jalapeno that is then, after the drying process, reconstituted or rehydrated in this vinegary tomato sauce, making it just really delicious. Spicy. It's got a tanginess to it. It's got a smokiness to it. It's sort of the Mexican equivalent of what I would call like a barbecue type flavor, but definitely with a Mexican flavor profile. Let's go back to look at our rice now. You can see that it is boiling now. So I'm going to put the top of it on, and I'm going to turn the temperature way down here to low. And then we're just going to let that simmer while everything else is going on here. So we've got our chipotles, the canned chipotles. That's the magic of this particular dish. Now in Mexico, everybody would tell you to go buy the ripest tomatoes that you can get and then roast them. That's a dry roast, either under a broiler, the way that I typically do it, or on a comal, which is like a griddle. That's a little messier, so I always suggest to people to put it under the broiler on a rimmed baking sheet and then roast your tomatoes that way. Today we're using fire roasted tomatoes in a can, meaning that this is the perfect kind of staple, pantry staple project, and something that is worthy of a beautiful Saturday night dinner. So we've got this fire roasted tomatoes, we've got the chipotles. I've got a little bit of a broth here. even though this is a shrimp dish, you could make a fish stock to go with it. And some of you I know are really avid home cooks, and you probably have a little fish stock frozen in your freezer. Well, that's fine. Use that if you want to. But for the rest of us, I think chicken stock is actually kind of the best thing for this. It adds a beautiful richness to it. Okay, so then we've got one more thing here to talk about, and that's garlic, because garlic is an essential part of this dish. So garlic, like I just minced up, could be used for this, but I'm going to make it really special because I know a lot of you are really avid home cooks, and you've kind of gotten into using black garlic. So what is black garlic? So I would say that black garlic is nothing more than a regular head of garlic. This is the last little bit of the head of garlic that I've been working on all week long. And it's kept at a certain temperature that's about, I'm going to say at about 130 or 40 degrees for about 3 or 4 weeks. That's what I've heard. We've made it before by putting it into a rice cooker and holding it on the sort of keep warm. So that would really not, that'd be more closer probably to 120 degrees, and just leaving the whole heads of garlic in there. Now, most people call black garlic fermented garlic, but there's no fermentation that's going on. It's just this sort of aging of the garlic at a higher temperature. Well, what turns out is, I'm a huge garlic fan, but what turns out with black garlic is this jam-packed flavor that is spectacular. It's got more of that flavor that people call umami, which is the Japanese term for deliciousness. You get it in Parmesan cheese or ripe tomatoes that are cooked down. You certainly get it in beef. There's lots of places that are sources of umami, but I'll tell you, black garlic is one of them. So I've been making, even though this dish is perfectly fine with regular garlic, I've been making it with black garlic where it just turns it spectacular. So if you go to a sort of a specialty grocery store, you'll find it. I find it all over Chicago in the specialty grocery stores. So think about using black garlic. If you don't have black garlic, use regular garlic, and then I just add a little splash, I just brought some up here, of Worcestershire sauce. That's that deep richness. I use Worcestershire sauce all the time, not to give a tremendous amount of flavor to a dish, Worcestershire flavor, just to give that umami richness, because Worcestershire sauce is like the Western equivalent of soy sauce. You could use a little soy sauce too in this dish and make it really delicious. So we've got all those ingredients sitting over there. The last ingredient that we have to talk about is shrimp, and I'm using these small shrimp. These are wild-caught Key West pink shrimp. This is something that you can find at Whole Foods. This is a private label product at Whole Foods, but interestingly enough, this is exactly the shrimp from the same supplier that we use in our restaurant for any time we want to make a shrimp cocktail or a shrimp ceviche. It works really good as a poached shrimp. So I highly recommend this one. It's sustainably caught, which means that they're not overfishing this Key West area. And I've actually visited the processing plant, so I've seen just how they do all of this, and I love the product. So I've got some of that defrosted. I keep a bag of this in my freezer at all times. We'll just set that to the side. Now let's talk about making dressing here. So this dressing that I'm going to make for you today, again, is very, very simple, but we should probably start by talking about the lettuces that would go with this. Yesterday I did some romaine lettuce with some arugula. That will take any kind of dressing. I made a very light dressing, which would be appropriate for those spring greens that perhaps you buy in the grocery store all the time. The small, tender, and very delicate little leaves would be fine for that. The dressing I'm going to make today is not good for that. You've got to have some more substantial leaves. So I've brought 2 of my favorite lettuces here. This is my current favorite. Now that's just going to look to you like a little baby romaine, right? But it's not baby romaine. It's related. All of the romaine family is called a cos lettuce, C-O-S lettuce. And this is a type of cos that's hitting the market now. It usually is sold as gem lettuce or little gem lettuce, and I love this one. Why do I love it so much? Is because it's got the crunch of the romaine, but it's got more sweetness. And I love the fact that I can actually use it in the whole leaf form, whereas the big leaves of romaine sometimes are a little awkward on the plate. So I'm just going to tear the base of that off, and I'm going to put some of the leaves down into the bowl that we're going to use to dress our lettuce with here. I just think this stuff is so delicious. It's just sweeter than romaine, so it works really good for me that way. And then I've got some leaves of leaf lettuce, and I'm just going to pick those guys off. This is a little bit softer lettuce than the little gem lettuce leaves that are there. I highly recommend, if you haven't tried the little gem lettuce, look for it in your grocery store, ask the produce if they've got it. I even find it in Mexico City, where we have an apartment, and we're near a nice grocery store there. Okay, so I've got nice little bit, I think I can get all of that in there. We'll put this guy over to the side here. Now let's make our dressing. So this dressing, I'm calling it Queso Anejo dressing. So Queso Anejo is the garnishing cheese in Mexico that is the closest to, say, a Parmesan or Romano cheese. So if you can get Queso Anejo, oftentimes called Queso Cotija, if you can get that, then I suggest that you buy it and use it for a distinctive flavor in this particular dressing. If you can't, then use your Romano or Parmesan cheese for it. I've put in 3/4 of a cup of the olive oil. Now I'm going to add some vinegar. Again, just like I did the other day, I'm using a very light vinegar for this, like I did for the chicken in escabeche. This is like a cava vinegar or a champagne vinegar, super light, or rice wine vinegar is good for this as well. And then I've got need for a little bit of creaminess in this dressing, so I'm going to put in some mayonnaise. So 3 tablespoons of mayonnaise, and then 3 tablespoons of queso añejo, queso cotija. Put that in. I'm going to give it a sprinkling of salt just to get it started. I've got some salted things already in there. So we'll put the top on, and we'll make that into a creamy dressing here. Absolutely nothing wrong with the blender today. Okay, let's give it a taste and see what we've got going here. What I like about this dressing is that it has a light creaminess to it, but it has a big punch of flavor from the queso añejo that's in there. Just think of it as sort of like a Parmesan-like dressing. Okay, the same thing that I did yesterday with our, get that little blemish off of there. I'm going to, I think this needs just a touch more salt. So let me go ahead and blend that in there nicely. And we'll dress this salad around the outside of the bowl. And then I'll just use my tongs here to turn the lettuce leaves. These are whole lettuce leaves, obviously, today. I will turn them in the dressing like that until I see that they're all completely and nicely coated. Okay. That I am going to put into, no, I'm just going to leave this in this bowl, I think. I think we'll just set that to the side like that and come back to it at the end. This is a dressing that you can hold in your refrigerator for a long time. However, I will say that when you hold it in your refrigerator, it's likely to separate. There's nothing much binding it in there. So it's the kind of thing that you'll want to shake up or re-blend right before you use it. But it's got a nice light creaminess. It's not heavy creamy like a ranch style dressing. Okay, now we're on to making, I'm going to take a look in this pot here just to see where we are. Do you see that there's little holes poking down all over the top? That's what you're really looking for there. I like for that. That says that it's cooked fully, and I like to look at it and test it at about this point in the production. You know, I'm going to use one of these little tasting spoons. Yeah, it's getting almost done here. What I forgot was the salt in it. That's why you always taste your food before you serve it. So this should have had about a teaspoon or so of salt. That will always vary depending on how salty the broth is that you're using for this. But I'm going to stir this in. Now watch, this is a technique that you really need to know. This is almost done. This is like more than 3/4 done. And so I'm gonna just very gently turn it like this. I don't want to beat up the rice kernels or anything. So I'm going to just turn it to mix in that salt that I forgot. It should have gone directly into that broth and been dissolved in that broth. But you see that it's almost completely done. Put the top back on here. Now I'm going to turn it off because it has cooked its time and it's almost done. And this last 5 minutes or so of cooking will be the perfect amount to finish the cooking and to absorb all of the liquid from that we're put in there at the beginning. Okay, so now it's time to make the very quick dish of shrimp al chipotle. So I'm going to put into the blender jar the can of fire roasted tomatoes, and I'm going to put it in there with all of its juice. I didn't drain this at all. The second thing that will go in will be our chipotle chilies. So this is up to you how much of the chipotle you want to put in there, how spicy you like it. I like it pretty spicy, so I would say I will put in 3 of these guys. If you like less spicy food, certainly put in 2 of them. Now I'm going to put some of this adobo broth in here, the canning liquid, and that stuff is super good. In fact, one of my favorite things to do is to add that canning liquid, that canning adobo, to my barbecue sauce, and it changes it. It just gives it a different dimension. I really love that stuff. So I'm going to put some of that in there as well. Now we're going to put in some of the black garlic in here. I'm going to put in the equivalent of about, this you use a little bit more of than you would the raw garlic. I'm going to put about 3, the equivalent of 3 or 4 cloves of it in here. And since I have it set out, I'm just going to give it a little splash of Worcestershire, not even a teaspoon of that. And then we'll make a puree out of that. So this won't take very long at all. Okay, now I just want to give a little taste of this to see where I am flavor-wise with that garlic, to see if I got enough of it in there. Because I want it to really be a player in this. I've got my skillet hot here, and I'm going to fill it with olive oil, which in Verkreis style cooking is used a fair amount. And then I'm going to add this pureed base to the pan, but I want to make sure that the oil is hot enough. I didn't have this pan on as hot. You hear that sizzle? Okay, that's what I'm looking for there. I'm going to add all of that mixture, and then I'm just going to keep it going in the pan. I want to cook this down quickly. I'm going to raise the heat a little bit. I'm going to cook this down quickly until it's the consistency of tomato paste, meaning I really want it to get thickened. A lot of people would not really want to do this. They would say, no, it's like, that's just an extra step. Why don't I just pour it in there and then put the shrimp in there and just cook it straight away? You'll never get the depth of flavor. You won't get the harmony of flavors. This is a very standard Mexican cooking technique. It's called frying the sauce base, and that's what I'm doing. And in that, we create a lot more sweetness, and we bring flavors together in a really remarkable way. Don't eliminate this step. You'll see that I'm doing it in my big wide skillet. That means that I can cook it down faster, and it won't take nearly as long. Now, this is not seasoned yet, and neither does it have the addition of the broth in it. Those are the only two things that we're missing in this situation. So I'm going to cook this down. I'm going to add the broth, and then I'm going to season it. Then we'll poach the shrimp in it. And you know about small shrimp like that, it won't take more than a minute or so, and we'll be ready to serve this beautiful, beautiful dish. You can see how this is thickening. The little bubbles that are coming up are much bigger now than they were at the beginning, meaning that the mixture is getting thicker and thicker. I started off as a pastry chef and still absolutely love doing pastries, but this is one of the things that you look at when you're making sugar syrups. For instance, the bubbles are really small and burst quickly at the beginning of making a syrup, and as it rises in temperature, you'll see that the bubbles will get bigger. So I think now is about the moment. You can see the consistency of this. It looks like, well, a little thicker than tomato sauce out of a can. Not quite as thick yet as the tomato paste, but I think it's about where I need it to be. The smell is incredible because you get all of that beautiful garlic flavor, you get the chipotle flavor, and of course the natural umami that you find in the tomatoes themselves, especially these fire roasted tomatoes. Okay, so now we got our broth. I'm going to add enough broth to give this a nice light consistency. I can always add a little bit more broth at the end if I wish. Yeah, that looks nice. I like that consistency. It's sort of that cream soupy kind of consistency. I'm going to give it now a little salt, because this doesn't have any salt added to it. And now goes the shrimp into that. So I'll scrape these guys into the pan here. Now it may look like, oh, you could add another half pound of shrimp in there. You could, but this sauce is just so good that I like to be able to serve this dish with a lot of sauce. But you could feel free to do this with shrimp, a little extra shrimp in here, or you can switch the whole dish up. You can make it with chicken. This is a great dish for chicken breast, if you want to know the truth. You can poach the chicken breast in here, or you could brown the chicken breast first before you added the sauce to it. Take the chicken breast out, cut it into little cubes, and then serve it that way. If you're going to use chicken thighs, then you're going to need to let them cook for a little bit longer. So you'll have to adjust for the timing on that. And of course, my good friend tofu is really welcome in this because this adds so much flavor to the tofu. Okay, so we're almost ready now to serve. I'm going to give this dish a little taste here, see if I got the salt right on it. I'll tell you that black garlic just does wonders for this dish. Okay, we'll set these guys aside so that we can take a nice look at the finished dish here. I'm going to turn the fire off underneath the shrimp now and just let them sit there for a second. We'll take the top now off of the rice. And it smells so good because I used good chicken broth in this. And you'll see just how wonderfully fluffy this rice cooked pilaf style is. These are just great proportions for a rice dish. And if you use medium grain rice, I think you'll just love the texture. This just takes rice to a whole different level. But it's really welcome as something to soak up the wonderful sauce that we have going here. Now for that, and this is a very typical Veracruz type of thing, they would put parsley in it. Now, I know everybody thinks that Mexican food has to have cilantro in it, and that's kind of the only fresh herb. But in Veracruz and Oaxaca, they use as much parsley as they do any cilantro. So I'm going to follow their lead in this and do a little bit of chopped flat leaf parsley. Now, flat leaf parsley is the only kind of parsley that you would find in Mexico. I have collected together the leaves like this, and I'm just going to slice them across because it makes what we would call, this is kind of a coarse chiffonade of the parsley leaves. So I'll sprinkle those over the top of this and then just stir them in. It adds a nice little freshness to the rice that I think is great. And if you really want to be in the traditional Veracruz style, I would highly recommend frying some ripe plantain, little cubes of it, and then put that into the rice. It's so good because it adds that tangy sweetness that you only get from fried plantains. And now we have our last dish, which is the Chipotle Shrimp. So I will spoon that into a nice dish here, making sure that we get plenty of the sauce around it. Sometimes we will do this same dish, cooking the sauce down and getting it just perfect, and then serving it with grilled shrimp. Man, that's an amazing dish. And we always in our restaurants serve it with this Gulf style white rice. I just think that the flavors of that just go together so nicely. And for a garnish for that one, we're going to put leaves of cilantro, but just leaves. We're not going to chop them up into smaller pieces. And there you go. In very little time, you can have this marvelous dinner, a really wonderful celebratory dinner with shrimp a la chipotle and the Gulf style white rice. And we have a simple salad here, but with a really interesting and delicious Queso Anejo dressing. Now, lots of people have asked me about the recipes for all of these, the things that I'm doing in these kitchen hangouts. They're all available to you, and they have been every day. We usually post them about an hour or so after we finish the Facebook Live, and you can find them. We usually post them together with the video when we repost the video, and we do it as a link to rickbayless.com/Facebook Live recipes. It's Facebook Live recipes with a hyphen in between each one of them. So that's where you can find all the recipes that I've done all week long. We're going to change platforms next week. We're going to be on Instagram Live. So if you've enjoyed these, then follow me on Rick Bayless at Instagram, and I will be announcing every day what we're going to be cooking together. And Tuesday through Saturday, I'm going to be hanging out in the kitchen with you. I hope you've enjoyed doing this as much as I have. This has been a ball for me. I don't get a chance to cook like this with everybody. Thank you all so much for all of your comments. It's been just wonderful to have some interaction with all of you. Thank you so much. Stay safe, and I wish you a great weekend, and I hope you're cooking this weekend. Thanks so much. See you soon.